some really beautiful rubber dam stuff. Here he is.
Hi, good
Hi
evening.
Maarten, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'm ready to go. I'm just
Okay,
popping the
perfect.
topic on the tags bit. If I can catch it. There we go. Pin the comment. So there's our topics for today. We're talking rubber dam dentistry and biomimetics. We had a little introduction with Jeff Davies from the States the other day, which was really great. He runs Biomimetic Study Club, which I think you've been featured on a few times, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a whistle-stop tour of kind of what biomimetics is about, but you're deep into it as well. So what's your journey so far, really?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. I'm currently doing a 12-month biomimetic mastership with David and Davey Ullman. Biomimetics is something that was new to me, as to everyone, I guess. It's not something we learn in dental school. I graduated in 2015. I worked in a couple of practices. And in September 2016, I started in one of the practices I'm still working today. And in that practice, we did a lot of reconstructive and restorative dentistry. And it was something that wasn't really on my mind by then. I really loved to do endodontics, and I wanted to become an endodontist. But as more as I saw from the restorative side of dentistry, the more I liked it. Since 2018, I have my own Instagram account, the Dental Dutchman. And since then, my work has grown exponentially because I was recording everything. Photography, making cases, and by seeing my own work, you can be really critical of your own work. So that was for me the reason to learn more about dentistry, and I saw how much I didn't know. And through Instagram, I came in contact with biomimetic dentistry, and it immediately caught my eye because it was something that I thought, well, it's really interesting. It's something we don't learn in dental school, but it is supported by literature, and that's something that was really important in dental school. That everything we did was supported by literature, and now we have found some field of dentistry that is totally supported, evidence-based, but we don't learn it. So that's when I wanted to learn more about it. And in January of this year, I started with the course, and thus far I've read over 125 articles. Wow. So the literature is really coming to me, and today, because we're currently in we call it an intelligent lockdown. So we are advised to stay at home. So I'm not working currently. I'm only doing emergencies, so I have some spare time. So today I was working on a biomimetic presentation, and then I had to get the literature all out again. And when you're reading it for the second or third time, it will even make more sense. So it's really, in my opinion, it's the only way we should do dentistry. But everybody has its own opinion. And if you ask a 1,000 dentists about a procedure, 1,000 people will give you different sequence of treatments or protocols. But I'm really, I've really set my mind on biomimetic dentistry, and I want to do it as good as possible.
As well as you can, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we'll dive right in, because I think that's kind of, as much as we need to know about you, we know where you're going, and everyone who's seen your page can see the kind of work that you're bringing kind of to the table. So I thought we were going to start today with a bit of rubber dam stuff, because that's kind of the cornerstone of what's going on. It allows us to control what we're doing in a much more precise manner. The patient's lips and tongue are out of the way, so we can work on the tooth very precisely. So I think we start with maybe choosing your rubber dam, choosing your clasps, and choosing the size of the hole per tooth. So if we start from there, what do you recommend, and what would your protocol be?
Well, first of all, I recommend the use of RUBBERDAM to everyone. I also give RUBBERDAM courses myself, and I think it's the best way to give high quality dentistry. I wouldn't necessarily say that your restoration will last longer, but you will give yourself a bigger chance to succeed, because the tongues and lips and cheeks are out of the way. You don't have any problems with saliva or bleeding. And if I look at my own work, I'm convinced that the restoration I do under RUBBERDAM are way better than when I do them without. So that's why I think it's really important, and everybody can have their own opinion about it. But I only see benefits in using it, and that's also the first slide of my presentation, my course, where I ask the question, why doesn't every dentist use RUBBERDAM? And what you mostly hear is that people find it really difficult to isolate difficult margins. For example, when you have to have a really deep cavity, or you have to be on the distal side of an or a second or third molar. When your wedge bounces back every time you press your wedge, it will fly straight at you. Different levels of attachment. It's also really difficult. For example, if a molar is extracted and you have a really deep pocket or a different level of attachment, it's really hard to get your RUBBERDAM on right, because the clamp and your RUBBERDAM will only go as far as the highest attachment level. And if that's on the mesial side and you have a gap of 2 to 3 millimeters on the distal, your clamp won't go down as deep to isolate the distal margin. So those are always situations that can be really tricky. Time as well. A lot of dentists say, I don't have the time. And I can understand, but it all has to do with practice, because once we started doing composite restorations, we didn't do them in 10 minutes. At university, I had like a whole afternoon to do one restoration. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's the same for RUBBERDAM. If right now, a simple isolation I can do within 20 to 30 seconds. If it's a more difficult case, it will take me up to 5 minutes. But if I do that, I will save so much time, because the patient isn't swallowing the whole time and closes his mouth, isn't talking to me. I don't have a problem with blood or saliva coming my way that I have to get rid of. So I think in the end you will save time, but you have to invest a little bit up front in placing your RUBBERDAM.
I think for sure the guys who I speak to who've moved towards doing more or less everything that you can under RUBBERDAM, they say the same thing. Look, initially it's a slow learning curve. It takes you a while to work out and which clamp to use. But once you grasp that information and that knowledge, you can look at tooth and go, I'm going to need X, Y, or Z clamp for this.
Absolutely.
And you just go straight to it.
Yeah, and then it becomes way easier. And what I always tell my patient is why I want to use it, and because some people use the argument that your patient doesn't like the use of RUBBERDAM. Well, it all has to do with the communication. So I always tell them that it's a protection going both ways. For example, if I drop something, the RUBBERDAM will catch it, and you don't have the chance of swallowing it. If I use an etchant or I use some other chemical stuff, I protect my patient that it doesn't come into contact with the gums or the tongues or the cheeks.
For sure.
And you don't want to have that. And if we look at the placement of the RUBBERDAM, it's always important that we use the right materials, that we have a good strategy, and we know the good technique. Because if you have a good strategy and a good technique, but your materials are wrong, you won't get a good isolation, and vice versa. So it's really important that everything is connected to each other, and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, the one question from revision for you there: are there any downsides other than the time and the learning curve when using a RUBBERDAM?
It's a good question.
It is slightly more expensive, I suppose, if you're looking.
Yeah, it is. In Holland, we have fixed rates, but the rubber dam can be charged separately. So the patient pays around 10 euros, I guess, for the rubber dam. So yeah, it is more expensive, but in the years I'm using it, I've only had one patient complain that it cost them it costs more money, because they all see the benefit. They after they've had it, they all like it, and they don't want to do it any other way. So that's not a big deal, in my opinion. Any other downside? Well, it can still be really difficult sometimes. Sometimes you're struggling to get a good you to get you get your margin isolated properly, but that's the same when you don't use it, because then you have the gums in the way,
The
and you have
tongue trying to lick everything and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah. So in my opinion, there aren't really downsides, but that also has to do with your skill. Once you are more skilled, you can handle almost every situation.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the slides that you
Yeah,
prepared.
yeah.
Um,
Well, if we first, if we look at the materials, I will change my camera, see how I do it here on the
awesome. I'm going to turn
bottom.
off the comments, guys, so we can see.
Yeah.
The questions down below.
If we look at the materials, there are some things we need to have. We need to have the rubber dam sheet. We need to have the punch to punch the hole, the frame to clamp our rubber dam to the frame, the clamps to clamp it to the tooth, the forceps to apply the clamp, and the floss to floss it through the contacts and even make floss ligatures, the floss ties. And in orange, we sometimes need a retraction cord, Teflon tape, or wedgettes. And when we look at the rubber dam sheets, I always advise to use a heavy rubber dam. The reason I advise it is that a heavy rubber dam makes sure you have an undamaged passage to the proximal areas, and you have maximal tissue retraction. And you can see that in the next slide. I will zoom out a little bit. On the left, you see two preparations where the margin is on the gum level, and only after placing the rubber dam, I didn't use any additional clamps or floss ties. You see that I've retracted the gums for a millimeter and a half. So so my margins become clear immediately. And when I need to place my indirect restoration, it's way easier for me to control the excess of cement. You can use a thinner sheet, but I would only recommend it if you're doing endo and you want to do one tooth, because once you need to floss it through the proximal contact points, it will 9
tear.
out of 10 times it will tear. So that's important. Well, then we've covered the sheet, but we also need to talk about the holes and where to place them, but also how big they need to be. So the punch is really important. And if we look here, it's sort of simplified schematic from what you see elsewhere on the internet. The biggest hole we see over here, it's the extra large. I use that for the anchor tooth, the anchor clamp. So when I'm isolating a full quadrant, for example, from the second molar on the lower right towards the incisor, I put a clamp on the last molar and I use the biggest hole. Then for the molar in front, I use the large, the premolar, the medium, the canines, the small, and the incisors, the extra small. You see some people that are changing up a little bit in the anterior region, so they use the small for the central incisors and the extra small for the lateral incisors. I just simplified it because the smaller the hole is, the tighter your rubber dam will be around the teeth, and the better isolation you get.
And obviously, like you saw, it's going to retract that gingival level between the teeth as well.
Absolutely.
A little bit better.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, then we have to think about what clamp we're going to use. And if we look at the clamp, we have on the distal side here we have the bracket. The bracket makes sure your clamp is gets it where it gets its stiffness from. Then you have the lateral wing, the anterior wing, and the anchor points. And the anchor points are very important for keeping the clamp stable, because we all know the clamp that is always working and or pings off, and that all has to do with the anchor points and a good grip around the tooth. Well, we have a lot of clamps. I won't go into
Loads.
detail in the clamps because it's too much for now, but it's
Mm.
important to know which clamp to use. And that's what you can see over here. What's important is that you always have a 4-point contact. You have 4 prongs on your clamp, and it needs to have 4 contact points on the tooth. And in my opinion, it's best that the prongs are inside the contour of the tooth, because on the lower photos, what you can see, I use the Acta clamp. It's a clamp that is fairly popular in Holland,
Yep.
but it's a really big clamp, and the problem is that the prongs are too wide, so it will almost always interfere in the interproximal area. And what you can see over here,
There's a gap.
yeah, there's a gap and it
Mm.
pinches in the papilla, and therefore the rubber dam cannot snug around the tooth. And it's the same in this one.
Yeah.
Also, it's in the papilla. Here the same. If you want to place your indirect restoration, the prong prevents a proper isolation. And here you see the rubber dam is yeah, it's like pinched between.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's important is that you if you look at a tooth, and you never just pick a clamp, but look at the tooth. What kind of tooth do I have? Is it a square one? Is it a round one? And pick a clamp that fits.
The tooth
Fits.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. And then if we look, what's a good isolation? Well, in my opinion, it's a dry working field. It's a big working field. We need to have inversion everywhere, tissue retraction where necessary, and minimal interference with restorative procedure. And
Yeah.
if you look here, I did an endo and indirect restoration. I isolated the whole quadrant. We're always tempted to put the clamp on the premolar and do the endo, but the problem is, once I'm using a microscope, I'm using a mirror, I'm using a handpiece with water spray, I need to use suction. Where am I going to fit that all? If this is my last tooth that I've isolated, I don't have
Yeah.
any place after my premolar. And as you can see right now, I have 2 teeth behind the tooth that I'm working on that are also isolated. So my nurse can put the suction in the back.
Go
I
to the
have the
back.
space to rotate the mirror. So in this way, it's way easier. And once you understand how to properly do it, it doesn't take you more time, but it will help you during your treatment.
It's important with this kind of thing to have a nurse who also knows what to do, because sometimes you need 4 hands.
Absolutely. In one of the practices I work, all my nurses place RUBBERDAM, so they know how to do it, and 9 out of 10 times they place it for me, and I only correct it if it's not good. So I replace the clamp, or I make some other minor changes. In the complex cases, I do it myself. But it really helps if your nurse knows the basics of rubber dam isolation, because she knows what you are doing, and she can also do it.
Absolutely.
And if you look at this case from A to Z, you see that I used almost the same materials, same strategy, and the same technique, and all these photos look like they were taken back to back.
Yeah, same angle.
Yeah. So that's really important. When we look at the technique where to punch, I always use a template. I really like templates, and the PACDAM is a really nice one. I hope everybody knows it. If not, Google it. It's very easy to use. You have it in plastic or in stainless steel, and it's also 3D printable. So you can, if you Google it, you can find a 3D file. You can print one of your own. It's a really neat template to give you an idea where your holes should be. Of course, it's bless you. Of course, this doesn't work in every situation. You always have an individual situation where you need to change the position, or if a tooth is missing. So never just punch all the holes. Always look in the mouth first and see what kind of situation you're dealing with.
The other thing you can do if you find the template online, you can print it on A4 and then laminate it.
Absolutely.
I've done that before. That's
cheaper.
another way to do it. Yeah.
Even cheaper. Yeah, yeah, it is. And here I have a video of the background. Let's see if I can play it. If people can see it right now.
That's lining it up for each corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is for your quadrant on that side, yeah. So
Yeah.
the anchor tooth on the other side. For anyone who doesn't know. Perfect. Yeah.
So that's a really small video that shows the use of the backdam. And once we go into the technique, it's important, if you look at this slide, once I put my floss in between the teeth, and I'm trying to floss it through, I'm actually trying to pull two sides through. And although it's a heavy rubber dam, if I do it that way, it will most likely tear. So what's important is that you first get one part through and then the second part. So you can see it in this slide. What I do, I place my floss on the top of the cusp tips, and then I slide towards the distal side, and I get it through. You see it here, and then I do the other side. And if I do it this way, I prevent any tearing. And then once I've done it that way, you see that it's nicely inverted, and it
normally inverts straight away when you do it one tooth to the next, as opposed to when you try and run it through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the basic isolation. I've gone through it really quickly. And of course there are a lot of advanced situations where you need to do something different. For example, if you look at this slide, this is also the slide for my course. In this case, I used a modified anterior clamp. It's the clamp number 9, also known as the butterfly clamp. And what I did, I cut one wing off, and in that way, it still is stable, but it gives me way more freedom to work around. So that's a really nice clamp. And we also have the B4. It's also a well-known clamp.
Yeah,
the B4 brinker can be really too loose or too, how do I say, too small, and it can ping off. So it sometimes it doesn't give enough retraction of the gums and the rubber dam, and it just keeps pinging off because of the pressure it gets from the gums and the rubber dam. So then
it's a very delicate clamp, and it's
absolutely, yeah.
It's an accessory clamp as well, definitely not a working clamp.
No, absolutely. And here you can see the same case where the modified clamp can get a really nice retraction, and you see the difference in the level of the rubber dam. If you look here opposed to there, and you see that my outline is here, so I still have a millimeter left for me to remove the excess of cement. So that gives me a really nice way of
controlling the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Guys, if you have questions, there's a little question tab at the bottom, and I'll shout them out so Maarten can answer us. Awesome. Yeah, that's really important, that kind of idea of non-retracted versus just rubber dam on. You can see it really, really nicely there. For example, if you were doing some sort of composite work, you're going to get a really poor margin, because you're going to be miles away from the gingival margin there.
Absolutely, yeah. And then a clamp can help, or a floss tie. What a floss tie can do, I can show you here. As you see in this slide, it's already a pretty nice isolation, but you can see the difference if I place a floss tie, and I get way more retraction, and that way I know I cover almost every part of the tooth. And otherwise, you can indeed, what you're saying, have that your margins are 1 or 2 millimeters off of the gums, and that's something that you want to prevent. That you remove the rubber dam.
You can see the perfect difference between the two again.
Yeah, and here you see the other side. And if I You can see difference.
Yeah.
So it makes a huge difference.
That illustrates it pretty perfectly, I think.
Yeah. And here you can see it from the top. What I did, I reversed my frame. You can see here the closed part of the frame is towards the nose of the patient. And I tied the floss ties on the frame to keep them under tension. As you can see, I usually start with one in the front, and then when you move more posteriorly, you see that it becomes more loose, and this one gets under tension, and that's because you're moving the frame. So once you tied it and you keep tightening other floss ties, you see that your frame moves a little bit and it gets a bit loose over here. What you can do, you can tie them again, or you can play around a bit to make sure it has equal tension everywhere. And here you can see that I've isolated from the second premolar to the second premolar. It's inverted everywhere, and now I have a really nice working field, and I can spend hours without having to be afraid of blood, saliva, or whatsoever.
Important to note there, your frame is curving in the direction of the patient's face, not away. Otherwise, that's not going to really work very well.
Absolutely. What I will do, I will head over to my Instagram page to show a case how we can manage the restoration on the distal side of the last molar. Let's see where it is.
Endogoy says nice isolation to that last one, so nicely impressed there.
As you can see over here, there are several ways to deal with a distal on your last molar. What I did over here, I did a double matrix technique. You can do it with several different matrix systems. What I did over here, I used an auto matrix. I don't really like the auto matrix, but they come in handy from time to time. What I did here, I placed it around the tooth, but because of its shape, you never get a nice tight seal all around the margins of your preparation. So you need to do something else, because if I just restore it with the automatics in place, I know I will have some excess and some flash, and I don't know how to remove it because it's an impossible part of the tooth to reach. So it's important that we do it, that we find something else. Well, what I've did here is
I'll get the second photo up for you there.
Yeah, great. So I placed a partial matrix inside, and then I adapted the partial matrix with some Teflon. And you already showed the second picture. This was just after preparation, and then I aerobraided it, and then you see the next picture. Let's see if my computer also.
I hope you guys can see that. Oh, it's going.
Yeah, you can see how clean it is right now, and it's a nice installation. And this is after removing the matrix without any polishing, but by working really carefully. And I usually am not really quick, so by using brushes and instruments to blend your composite, you only need to give your restoration a high polish and do some minor occlusal adjustments. You don't have to cut all your composite, so that's important. And here you can see that I even put the clamp on top of the automatrix to keep it fixated, to make sure it doesn't start rocking, because sometimes what I don't like about the automatrix is the big part where you need to tighten it, because that can sometimes be in the way with your clamp, and you cannot get your automatrix to be tight enough. It will be or too tight and it will come up, so your outline will not be sealed, or it will be too loose and it will rock from every time you touch it. So there are different ways we can use it, and I will go to that case right now. I have it somewhere over here.
Revision for You is asking, do you use RUBBERDAM for every patient where it's appropriate, even if it's not an essential?
I always use RUBBERDAM. Yeah, always. Yeah.
Obviously, perio is different, but
but no discussion for me. It's always RUBBERDAM. If you look at this case, on the left you see the initial situation. The second is after preparation, and the third is after the restoration is done. What I did over here, I used a different matrix system. It's the TOR-VM, TOR-VM, and it's the saddle matrix. And it's a really nice system because these two tips, they will always try to go towards each other. It's similar to a club spin. If you pinch the ends, the legs will go apart, and if you release it, they will go back to each other. And it's the same principle. And you have different matrix bands that you can apply. Some with a belly, some flat, some extra curved, and it really helps. And as you can see over here, it's already on the cervical margin. It's a really nice isolation, but the walls, the upstanding walls, there's still some gap left.
Yeah.
So what I did, I placed a partial matrix in it, and then I adapted it with Teflon. And in this system, it's way easier because you just have to pinch the ends of the saddle matrix. It will open up a bit, and you can slide your partial matrix in between the tooth and your saddle matrix.
Yeah, so you're not going to get that really wide, almost ice cream cone.
No.
You're going to get a nice little curve on the.
Absolutely. And here you can see it by adapting it. You see that this is snug towards the tooth. This is tight against the tooth. So I've created a little box here that I can now easily fill without having to worry about any excess. I only need to polish it afterwards. And here you see the restoration before final polishing, just after removing of the matrix.
It's almost there already.
Yeah, and I only have to do some minor occlusal adjustments after I remove the rubber dam and do a final polishing, and that's it.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. Guys, any questions on those couple of techniques? I think they were pretty self-explanatory, but it's something that you may not have seen before. Let me turn the comments on. People seem to comment lots. Let's see. Yeah, so that was a really interesting case because it's something which is it solves the issue of the contact point being too high, being too bulky, and you probably have less. Do you think less adjustment to do afterwards after you've used a technique like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Almost none.
Should we talk a bit about onlays and bonding? I think that's probably something that's really useful as well.
I will look for a nice case. Let's see. I think this is a nice case. If we look here at this case, what we can see on the left, here's an indirect restoration, and this is a composite restoration. This is my build-up after removing it, and this is the final result, and I will go deeper into it. If we look here, the initial situation, there was some recurrent decay. So after removing the indirect restoration and removing the composite restoration, we had some cracks, we had some decay, and I always use caries dye. I would recommend you all to use caries dye because it makes it really clear where the caries is, and it's important that the outline of your restoration is completely free. So you want to have a peripheral seal zone that's 2 to 3 millimeters wide, where there's no staining at all. And you can leave some staining, but that's only in the area of the pulp horn. If I'm here on the mesial aspect, I know I won't have any pulp there, so I can go as deep as possible. And in theory, you can even go as deep as 9 millimeters, and you don't have to worry about the pulp. So caries detecting dye is a really useful tool to make it easy for yourself, because I use a microscope with 6 to 8 times, or sometimes 10 to 15 times magnification. Sometimes I think my preparation is clean, and then I use caries detecting dye and it isn't. So it's a really nice tool, and it doesn't take any more time. It will only save you time because you immediately see if you're done or not. So there's no doubt anymore. After I've completely cleaned these teeth, I removed the cracks that were present, the thin cusp. I overlaid them. I did immediate dentin sealing. Well, what we do with an immediate dentin sealing is after preparation, we have a fresh dentin wound. and we want to seal it as quickly as possible, because if we don't seal it and we leave it as is, we have the problem that bacteria or oral fluids come in contact with the dentin. It will decrease your dentinal bond strength when you place your indirect restoration. So we have a perfectly fresh dentin wound without any infection or any contamination that we can immediately seal.
Close it off.
And we know that we get a 300 to 400% increase in bond strength. So
not only
it's really
that, you also save your pulpal health as well, which is
absolutely no post-operative sensitivity. So you can even send your patient home in a situation like this. You don't even need to do a provisional. Only for the problem or the chance of migration of the teeth, but it's not necessary for the convenience of the patient, because they don't feel anything. After I've done the immediate dental sealing, I sent the patient home, and I always use the provisional restorations, because it takes about 2 to 3 weeks before they receive the final restoration. Yeah. And here you can see it. Another great benefit of immediate dental sealing is that any undercuts you have, you can fill them with composite. So if I have an undercut over here, I would have to remove even more of the cusp or even lower it. But by filling the undercuts, I can remain a lot of healthy tooth structure. This is what my preps look like. So the buccal cusps are gone, the palatal is still in place. I overlaid the buccal cusp because they were too thin, and we already had an indirect restoration in place. And it was like an overlay situation.
Yeah.
And then go to the next slide. Here we see the indirect restorations on the cast
models.
Yeah, on the models. And then here we're at the fitting appointment. I remove my temporary restorations. I always fit the final restorations on the tooth to see how the margins are. I don't check the occlusion, because with Emacs you want to be careful. But I see how the contact points are, how the margins are, if the fit is good. What I then do, I isolate the teeth just like I would normally do, and then I cement these teeth one at a time to make sure I don't have any excess that will cause any recurrent decay or any periodontal problems. So what I did in this...
Is that heated composite? And the guys who've asked questions, we'll get to those in a minute. Don't worry.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do over here, I sandblast both teeth with AquaCare. With aluminum oxide. I do that. I do them both at the same time, and then I will cover one of the teeth with Teflon to make sure there's no bonding or excess cement getting onto that tooth. What I do, I prepare my tooth and I prepare my indirect restoration, and I place it with heated composite. I always use APX by Curay. And it has really nice thixotropic characteristics. So once you heat it, it becomes really soft. And if you wait a minute or so after placing your indirect restoration, it will get a bit more stiffer, and you can remove the excess really easily.
Just playing on the heat, you can soften it enough to get it on and fill any gaps. Waiting, then you can remove it. It's very clever. Yeah.
And then once I've light cured it, I can remove the excess, I can remove the Teflon, and then I can do the other tooth. What I do over here, I don't know if, I have the picture over here. You cannot really see it in this slide, but a nice tip. For the people that use Teflon, they know that the suction will likely get rid of it. So what's important, what you can do over here, you can use a separation ring that you use for your matrix to get it snug around the tooth to hold it on. And what you can do over here, if you take a long enough piece, you can fold it under the clamps of your under the wings of your clamp. So in that way, it will still be stable, and I can even use some liquid dam over this margin to keep it in place.
Just to hold it in there, yeah.
Yeah, just to hold it, and then this is the final result.
Awesome, perfect. Let's dive into these questions because I think that was pretty comprehensive a technique. So thank you for that. Let's see what we have down here. So got loads, guys. Thank you. What material are you using for the IDS?
I always use Optibond FL as a dental bonding system.
Yep.
Then I use a flowable composite. Ideally, you would use the the Majesty Flow by Curay. It has the ideal characteristics with the optimal E modulus. And if you do when Magne described his IDS in his paper, it's mainly only Optibond FL because it's a highly filled bonding system. You get enough coverage of your dentin, and you don't have to be afraid of any how do you say it, when you that you expose your dentin again. But once you aerobrate, there is still slight chance that you remove it by aerobrasion and you expose dentin again. So I always use a flowable. We call it the resin coat, and what we do by that, we apply a thin layer of approximately 0.5 millimeters of flowable. What it will do, it will cover your dentin that has been infiltrated with your bonding system, and it will also it can also fill undercuts and gives a nice geometry to your preparation, so it gets really smooth transitions.
Yeah.
And if you have really big undercuts, or you need to do a restoration or build up or a deep margin elevation, I always use APX as well. Because its E modulus of around 17 gigapascal is similar to that of dentin. So that's the best material to use from a biomimetic standpoint. Yeah,
sure. And I use the Optibond FL as well. I quite like using the gold standard system of using the prime and then the bond separately. We've got a couple more questions. Another one here. What about doing an MO on a distal tooth? Does the clamp interfere with the garrison?
And it all depends on the clamp that you choose. What I've said before is if you choose the right clamp, then the prongs of the clamp will be on the inside contour of the tooth. If I pick a clamp that is too big, I won't get my if you look at this for example, see if this opens. I see my internet is a bit slow.
Let me see if I can find it. Which post was it?
Let me see. I will reconnect with Wi-Fi, see if it works. It's where was it? It was, which one did I pick? Don't see it anymore.
I'm scrolling to see if I can see.
Yeah, just get, for example, this one with the crack dissection. If you look at this one, and I want to place my matrix here, there is a big chance that my matrix gets onto this part of the clamp, and then I will have a problem with placing it correctly. So then I need to find another clamp that is smaller, and in this case I use the 12A or 13A, one with the serrations on the inside. But what you can also do is use an W2A or 2A clamp. It's a premolar clamp, and you can also use it on the heart-shaped teeth like this, so the second molar or the third molar. And then you will stay inside the contour of the tooth, and you won't have any problem. Here, for example, you see that the prongs are in the contour of the tooth, so I don't have any problem when I need to place my matrix. Here you see the preparation. So the choice of your clamp is really important. If you're going to be successful in your restorative procedure.
The next question was, let me have a look and find it. A couple of really good ones. Oh, they've gone. Guys, get the questions back in. They've disappeared for some reason. But it was talking about, sorry if I can remember. Does bonding direct to your enamel ensure a better long-term result in terms of recurrent decay versus using a composite? And this was when we're talking about putting an onlay on.
Okay, if you're doing an immediate, I will just turn my screen for now. If you are going to do an immediate dental sealing, it's important that you get the enamel surface free of any bonding residue. So once you do your indirect or your immediate dental sealing, once you've light cured it, I always take a round diamond burr and I go really slow speed, sometimes even without water, and I just clean the enamel margins to make sure you get a little bit of white dust, and then I know I re-prep the margins, and then I know those margins are free of any bonding system.
Yeah.
And then during the appointment, I will sandblast them, etch them, and I will pre-treat them for the fit of the indirect restoration.
Indirect, yeah. And this kind of leads nicely onto that part, because we're talking about air abrasion. Is there any alternative if you don't have an air abrasion or sandblasting?
Yeah, you can do a couple of things. You can use pumice, and that can help, but it's not as effective. Or you can use a round diamond burr and do it on a really slow speed. But then again, you have a chance of altering your preparations. So that's something that you don't really want to. So air abrasion is the best because it will only give a micro roughness, and it doesn't alter the geometry of your preparation or alter your outlines.
Yeah, and then anterior clamp question. Is there any recession issues there?
There's always a chance of recession. I haven't encountered it, but you always have to be careful, especially in the thin biotypes. And I'm always very careful with retraction cords because there are a lot of studies because they are almost always impregnated with some sulfide chloride, or I don't know exactly, but you always have to be careful that you don't get a recession. So you don't want to leave the retraction cord in too long. So I only place it when I'm going to take my impression, and then it's get 2 cords in, get them out, make the impression. So they're in for maximum of 2-3 minutes, I guess.
Okay.
And with a clamp, you can get the same issue. And yes, after placing, you always see a minor recession, but if you see a patient in a week, it will always be back at its original level position, because you have the sulcus, and the only thing you're doing is giving a little bit of pressure. I can imagine if you put a clamp on top of the gums, so you perforate them, you damage them, then you can get probably more problems in the future. But there's always a chance. I haven't encountered it, but
for sure. And then any tips for dental students on shade selection, things to avoid and what to focus on?
That's a good question. It's always important to get is it shade selection for composite or for indirect restorations for your ceramics?
I think this is probably a ceramics question, but I think maybe just briefly go over both.
Okay. Yeah. What I do when I go for an indirect restoration, I always use a cross-polarized picture. In a cross-polarized picture, you don't have any light reflection, so you really get an objective color. So what I do, I pick 2 or 3 tabs from the Vita Shade Guide, and I match them to the tooth. I think, okay, it's going to be an A2 or an A3 or a B2 or B3. And I get the ones that I think fit the most, and I put them next to the tooth. And I will always take a cross-polarized picture. And let me see, I have one of the case I posted yesterday. Let me see. It's
I'll get that because I can put it on the top screen.
Oh, yeah, perfect. It's this case is just something that I've tried yesterday. I was practicing with composite, and if you see on the upper left is the initial situation, the upper right is my final result. It looks okay on the upper right. If you look on the lower left, you see a cross-polarized picture, and you don't see any light reflections. And as you can see on the right aspect of the tooth, I have too much enamel composite, so you see a kind of gray halo on the more on the right. There, that spot. So it's a really nice way. You also see the transitional line. If you look closely, the transitional line of the composite, a little bit lower from the,
About here?
no, even lower,
Oh,
lower,
so this
lower.
bit here.
There, yeah,
Got it.
there. You
I
can
thought
see
that was
that.
a sponge on my
Yeah.
screen.
No. You can see you can see the transitional line. So this is a really objective way of seeing color and see how good the integration is. So that's what I always use, and I also use eLab. I don't know if any of you know eLab. It's with a special gray card, and the gray card you can how should I say it? It's a gray card, and my technician can standardize the photo, so he knows
Right. Okay.
that this photo has this is a standardized.
I think I know what you're talking about there. So
Yeah.
basically, when you're taking the photo, it gives them a known shade, and then they can measure.
They can translate it into a ceramic recipe.
Mm.
I probably have a case here where I show that picture. Let's see where I can find it. Is it over here? Not in this one. Let me see. Here you can see a great picture. Here you see on this slide, you see the a normal picture.
Yeah.
And here you see the cross polarization.
Yeah.
And it's way more objective, because you can get some false results or some bad results by the reflection of the reflection. So it really helps. And with composite, well, it's really important to know the material, the brand you are using, because I use different brands and every system has its own way of using it. For example, I use Majesty from Kuraway, and what you see with that, if you use too much enamel shade, it will become way too gray. And with other materials, the enamel shades are way more forgiving. So it's important to understand the composite system you're using, and the only way to do it is by practicing on typodonts or extracted teeth, because then you get a feeling of the material and know, okay, if I place this, then I get this result. If I place this, I can get that result.
Yeah.
And you can see that the photo from yesterday, that post, that was my second or third try on the tooth, and this was my best. But it was also getting to know the system a little bit more. Yeah.
A new question from Dr. Kalang. I hope I've said that properly. Kalalang. When isolating an anterior, have you ever had the clamp slip and chip the margin?
Luckily not. I have had the clamp slip, but I've never had any iatrogenic damage through my clamp, luckily.
I think that's probably down to selecting the right clamp initially, because if you've got the 4-point contact, you're not going to have a rocking motion, which is going to cause this.
No, the only time it pings off is, for example, a B4, when it doesn't give enough retraction. What it does, it instead of staying on the margin, it comes a little bit up. But that's it. It's not that it's flying around and it's a projectile that you need to duck to
get out of the way of. Any thoughts about DME with an indirect restoration, so deep marginal elevation versus crown lengthening?
You can do both. My personal advice, I have never done a really surgical crown lengthening where I make a flap, I remove bone, and then I get it back together. I always prefer a deep margin elevation. The reason why is that it's a really nice way of relocating your margin to a better position. And if you get a super gingival outline, your impression taking is easier. Controlling during your cementation is easier, and isolating with RUBBERDAM is way easier. And recently there was an article published by Marco Gresnick and David Jardol. It was a 12-year evaluative study on deep margin elevation, and they also saw that you get a really good results in way of the gingival response. And if you do deep margin elevation, it's way more comfortable for the patient than doing a surgical crown lengthening. So if you can do it, and it's only a small part that you need to where you need to relocate the margin, I would always go for a deep margin elevation. I can understand if you have a full crown prep that it's 2-3 millimeters below the surface, you have to find something else. Yeah, absolutely.
It's down to the situation. And what do you tend to do for your deep margin elevation? We've only got 5 minutes left, by the way, before we get to 1 hour.
Yeah. I always use APX by Curare, but I've already told us that the E modulus is 16.7 gigapascal, and the dentin itself is 20 megapascal. So it's kind of similar to dentin. What you need to do, you need to use a matrix that gets a really nice tight seal around the tooth, because you don't want any contamination. Because if you do a deep margin elevation and you have some contamination, you will get some recurrent decay in the future.
Yeah. Do you ever do anything like interproximal kind of gingivals? I want to say maybe remodeling with a thermocol burr or something like that.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it depends. It depends on the case. Sometimes you need to do it, or I get my
electrical cord.
Yeah. Because sometimes you need to get rid of a little bit of gum, or sometimes what you see, if you have a big decay, that the gum already grown into it, then you need to get it out of the way. And then I prefer those techniques more than a blade, because a blade won't stop the bleeding.
Yeah, you want that cauterizing effect as well, which is really useful from the heat of either the solid burr without the flutes, or the burning effect of the electric quartering machine. And Revision for You is asking, I think we'll make this our last question because we've got about 3 minutes left before it just cuts us out. How long has it taken you to get good at placing the rubber dam?
You can get basic isolation you can learn within a week, because you have, depending on your program, I see 10 patients a day, I guess, something like that. So I have 10 chances a day to practice. So at the end of the week, I've done 50 rubber dam isolations. Well, then I know the basic isolation. Of course, the more sophisticated, difficult situations, you don't encounter them as much, so it takes more time. But it all has to do with practice. And if you can try it as much as possible, or you can find a colleague or an assistant that you can practice on, it will only help you grow even more. And I would always suggest, if you have any trouble, to find a rubber dam isolation course somewhere near you, or through internet, a webinar or something, because they can give you really neat tips on how to get that extra bit, those marginal gains in getting better at isolation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is more how many times you do it, not how many years it takes. Because if you're doing it once a week, like you say, it's going to take you a long time to get really good. If you're doing it 10, 15 times a day, it's the same as anything. You're going to get good really quick.
Absolutely.
But, thank you for coming on. I'm just wary of the time, because we always get cut off on this. And then we have to restart the stream, and everyone's like, some guys have left us and we lost all the questions and stuff. Thank you for coming on. This has been like really, really instructive, I think, for the guys who are trying to get into this kind of work. You've kind of laid it out in a very easy to follow manner. Guys, if you're not already following Maarten, please get on that right now. I was going to send a tag in the stories afterwards. But yeah, thank you for coming on.